How do I keep track of all my ferments? I use a fermentation logbook. This specific type of printout is what really helped me learn and get a grasp on the new types of ferment projects that I have going on. For example, I'll have a gingerbug yogurt or I'll have sauerkraut fermenting. And instead of having a ton of reminders on my phone and having something that's like more physical and that can stay in the kitchen, is really nice to have this easy reference point for where my ferments are at in their fermentation stage, and it helps me keep track of what works and what hasn't worked. When I know something works, I'll put a little red star next to it and I'll say, this technique, this version worked, do this again. And then if something doesn't work and I've written down what I've done, I'll know why it didn't work. Or I'll say, oh, I added maybe too much milk, or I didn't have enough of an incubation time, or my temperature was too low, or, and I can troubleshoot a little bit easier because I've written it down. Now, this is available for free on my website, crestdietetics.com. And if you are interested, there is a $2 paid version that has a fermentation quick reference cheat sheet. And this is going to be helpful for anyone that's getting started with fermentation, or if you have really strong skills in one area of fermentation, what it's like to go into other domains of fermentation. I go over tips for success, the 4 main fermentation microbial groups, like lactic acid bacteria for yogurt and sauerkraut, but then acetic acid bacteria for vinegar and kombucha, or yeast for breads, wine, and beer, and molds that would be used for cheeses. I talk about in a really easy table, what do all of these different categories of microbes, what do they produce? How can we measure if they are properly fermenting, eating, replicating, and making a delicious fermented food? Next, in the $2 version, I also touch on the microbial life stages and what you should be aware of when you are fermenting a microbe. I go over the lag phase, log phase, stationary phase, and the death phase, and signs that you can look for to help you understand where you may be in your fermentation process with your recipe. Those that have watched my yogurt, CFUs, and pH dynamics video will know what I'm talking about. I talk about how I personally use pH to track the progress of my ferments. I give a link to the pH strips that I personally use and the examples of when pH actually won't be a good proxy for understanding when your ferment is done. If you have bright, tangy yogurt, pH is a fantastic factor. But if you have overdone sauerkraut and it's mushy, slimy, it still is gonna have an appropriate pH, but you'll have visual factors that tell you this isn't any good and that you should not eat it. Now, with lactic acid bacteria, or labs, being the true workhorses of the fermented foods world, I also give a brief table on the difference between homofermentive labs and heterofermentive labs. Homofermentive labs are lactic acid bacteria that don't produce gas. So when you put homofermentive labs in milk, for example, they're not going to produce gas, but they'll produce a tangy acidic yogurt with lactic acid. In heterofermentive lactic acid bacteria, you're going to get these lactic acid bacteria on cabbage, for example, that when you submerge it in a salty brine, they're going to produce gas. And they're going to also produce lactic acid, ethanol, or acetic acid. Now, that's the difference between the two. One is only going to produce lactic acid, the homofermentive labs. The other one is going to produce lactic acid and a few other compounds. I split up those differences between these two in the $2 version of my fermentation logbook. And finally, I go over how to recognize if your fermented food is overdone. When you have a homofermentive lab from yogurt, how can you identify if it's gone too far? Well, your yogurt will split into curds and whey, and your acid will be too low. It'll be too acidic. In sauerkraut and other heterofermentive labs, it'll be good with a bright, tangy crunch and a pH of like 3.5 to about a 4.0. But if you get a slimy, mushy texture, you've over-fermented and everything has broken down and your bacteria are not thriving anymore and they've gone into the death phase. And other toxic metabolites have taken over and they have ruined the ferment. Another easy example is a gingerbug. You want your gingerbug to also be around the 3.5 to 4.0 pH range, and it should have a bright, fizzy flavor to it. But you'll know that it's gone too far if it goes from bright and acidic to a dull, flat, and almost funky. Now, in a more real-life example, usually what I will end up doing is I will take my fermentation logbook, I will print off 2 pages onto 1 page so I can get this little booklet, and then if I start a new one, I'll write, like, for example, like gingerbug at the top, and I will have my ferment name. I'll write my ferment name here, and then like I'll do my dates, and I'll have it all be the same one. So these individual sections don't need to be for all different types of ferments. It can be your daily log for the progress of a fermentation project that you have going on. And so you could write down gingerbug start day, and then you would have maybe 5 days of a little bit of activity, and then day 5 you would say, wow, bright bubbles, good activity, gingerbug activated, and then you would know, the steps it took to take you from a unalive ginger sugar solution to an active living gingerbug that is ready to make soda, wine, beer, or even bread. Why am I doing this? This is my way of genuinely saying thank you and giving back to the community. I have learned so much through everyone online being so helpful, and now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty good at fermentation, and so this is my way of contributing and giving you guys a tool and a resource that I think I would have liked when I was starting out, and so here it is. I wanna thank you so much for watching this video. Once again, my name is Matthew Kress, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.